From 2014 onwards, when I became Bodleian's librarian, we made some more kind of strategic steps to increase the profile of photography in our collections. The daughter of Helen Muspratt was keen to find a permanent home for the archive of her mother. So where better than one of the cities in which Helen made such an important contribution to the field of photography.
When I retired to Swanage in 2005, I decided to write a book about my mother. And then the question arose about what to do with the archive, because I had over 2,000 prints, let alone all the negatives. People said, you should try the Bodleian. And I just thought, no, that's the oldest and most famous library in the world, and no chance. But they persevered, and I wrote to Richard of them. His opening words were, I really want to have your collection. So it was problem solved.
The exhibition is designed to do two things. One is to celebrate the life and work of a great woman photographer, one whose practice for a significant part of her life was based here in Oxford, documenting the city and the university. For us in the Bodleian, it's important also that photography gets regarded as a subject worthy of academic study.
She must have been very well taught, I think, at the Regent Street Polytechnic. While she was there, and as soon as she came out, she was taking very interesting, very mature photographs, dark, dramatically lit portraits of people. She was very influenced by Renaissance portraiture. And she said that you never see faces full on in Renaissance paintings. They're always sort of slightly half full face and side lit with the eyes looking down. One of my favourites is the busking miner. It's just so haunting and such a beautiful, beautiful face. Frances Newbery introduced her to Lettice Ramsay, who was this extraordinary widow from Cambridge who just lost her husband very tragically at an early age and 2 small children and wanted something to do. And by the end of the year, they'd set up a studio together in Cambridge. Lettice was very exuberant and loved parties and very sociable and unconventional, but they just hit it off for some reason. Helen was very different from that, and she said, I was only a soldier's daughter. I was so inexperienced, I had no idea what life could be like until I got to Cambridge.
She sees the work of photographers like Man Ray, for example, and she's inspired to try some of those techniques like solarization and multiple exposures that really quite avant-garde photographers in continental Europe are pioneering. She is one of the first women photographers, certainly in the UK, to adopt these techniques and to experiment and to have a fine art practice alongside a very successful commercial practice.
The famous photograph of Helen's self-portrait, I often wonder how she took that photograph, because she had to get the 3 portraits of herself, 2 profiles, one on each side, and her full face, onto one negative, and it was solarised. And I wonder whether lettuce was involved or whether she just quietly did it in her studio in Swanage. I just don't know. Her interest in politics began in Cambridge with mixing with Lettuce's friends. Lettuce knew everybody, including all the Cambridge spies who later became famous, and many of them were acting for political reasons. So there was a great deal of passion about politics in those days, and a lot of intellectuals were interested in communism. Helen met my father, Jack Dunman, in Cambridge. He'd been to university at Oxford and read PPE and had become very interested in politics, and eventually joined the Communist Party. The trip to the Soviet Union had a very, very big impact on Helen, and it encouraged her to join the Communist Party. Two of them, they were planning to run both together, but it turned out very quickly that Lettuce remained in Cambridge and Helen moved to Oxford.
It was through family connections that I met Helen, who wanted a young girl to be an apprentice.
It must have been quite unusual to have an all-women studio at that time.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I was really very proud, really, to know that there weren't many women companies, certainly photographic companies, that had all-female staff. So I did feel pretty special, really, I think. Looking at the history of how she set up 3 studios in her early 20s, early 30s is quite remarkable. She was a great role model, certainly. Although she wouldn't say that she was a feminist, she certainly had a lot of the traits, really, that you would associate with feminism.
She had to lead a professional photographic commercial studio. She had to make money. She had to, sort of feed her family. But to do so in ways that didn't compromise her own approach to the aesthetics, the art, and her social and political principles.
Her first sitting would be about 11. She would normally have about 3 or 4 people in a day. She would certainly have a wedding on a Saturday. She worked very hard. She had a lot of passion for her portraits. She worked tirelessly to get the best out of her sitters.
There's an absolutely beautiful portrait of a woman. We don't know her name, sadly. She was almost certainly a student in the university. The photograph brings her beauty and her character out. She just shines radiantly from the gelatin silver on the surface of that piece of paper.
She only took about 8 to 10 shots, and they were all very carefully considered. She was very scornful of photographers who just sort of snapped away and hoped for the best.
Even though she might only have been sat with them for a few minutes, she managed to get right to the heart of the matter. And I think that's one of the things that mark her out, in my eyes, as being such an extraordinary photographer. By securing her archive in the Bodleian, we are really putting a flag in the sand that Helen Muspratt is somebody that the history of photography, the history of culture, the history of the city of Oxford need to take seriously.